Exit polls give a big majority to the Conservative Party in Britain's general election. Boris Johnson's party predicted to win 368 seats against 191 for Labour. Evo Morales arrives to take asylum in Argentina. He says he is enthusiastic about returning to the struggle. And thousands march in protest against elections in Algeria. Hello and welcome to teleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Voting has ended in Britain's general election, which many described as a fork in the road. The polls closed at 10 p.m. local time. Exit polls give a big majority to the Conservative Party with 368 seats in Parliament and Labour with only 191. If confirmed, that would mean Prime Minister Boris Johnson would have an absolute majority of 42 seats. The Conservative Party of Prime Minister Boris Johnson maintained a lead of around 10% over Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party for most of the campaign. But that gap seemed to narrow in the final days, and some observers suggested the Conservatives could fail to win an outright majority, opening the possibility of Corbyn leading a minority government. Party leaders cast their votes early on as more than 4,000 polling stations opened across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. All 650 parliamentary seats are up for grabs. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was hoping to secure a mandate and a majority to take Britain out of the European Union. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party stood on a radical platform of defending the National Health Service, expanding social spending, and a green revolution to combat climate change. During the day, voters in London have expressed their views about Jeremy Corbyn and the likely outcome of this election.
With his community, he's been very helpful. What he's talking about with the £10 an hour jobs and that's very good for the younger generation as well, which is good, isn't it? But what he's got to be clear on is Brexit. That's the final straw, isn't it? He's got to be clear on Brexit, innit? And that's not what he's been clear on.
I've just voted, and I voted because I think that the government has just been stuck for a long time, and we need to get things moving now.
I think we will be in as big a mess tomorrow as we are today, because I suspect that there won't be a majority government after today, so it will be in exactly the same position as we were before the election, which was a mess.
Well, I guess if you don't vote, then you can't complain about why it's not working. And I think there were some real choices to be made this time and some real issues.
Party leaders made a last push for votes late Wednesday. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn held a final rally in London where he said voters must choose between the Johnson-Trump way or the Labour way to do away with the housing crisis, poverty and to save the National Health Service.
Are we seriously going to allow our public services to be ripped up and destroyed by this person, by that government? So anyone that says there's no choice in this election, there's very much a choice. There's never been, ever, in British history, a clearer choice in the election that's being held tomorrow.
And now let's go live to London and talk to teleSUR's political analyst Tariq Ali. Tariq, the exit polls don't look good for Labour. How reliable do you think they are?
Well, who knows? But I think they can't be that wrong. They might have got the figures wrong by 10 or 15, but it looks likely that the Conservatives have won a convincing majority and that we will have a Conservative government now for another 5 years. If this is the case, and it looks like it, then we just have to be honest and acknowledge that this is a disaster for the Labour Party. It's a disaster for the left of the party, which had won over the party and attempted to reform it in the proper sense of the word and get rid of the Blair-Brown heritage. The loss of seats, if Labour has lost 70 seats, it's a sign that large numbers of working class people in the north of England are very angry with the party. Now, the question is why? Labour's individual policies taking the railways and the utilities back into public ownership were popular. Labour's defence of the National Health Service was popular. But this election took place at a time when the Conservative leader, the new Conservative leader, Boris Johnson, said two things. If you want Brexit to be settled for once and for all, we are the ones to do it. In response to that, the Labour Party said, we'll give you a second referendum. And they seriously underestimated the anger of Leave voters and the anger of people who were just fed up. There was Brexit fatigue. People didn't want yet another referendum. They wanted the results of the first referendum implemented. Had Labour allowed a free vote in their party when Theresa May first produced her agreement with Europe and allowed it to go through, the election, whenever it took place, would have discussed the real issues. This election was now largely about Brexit, and the anger in the North is, we voted to get out of the European Union. Why did the Labour Party try and stop it? Why didn't our leaders say a democratic vote has taken place, which they said at the beginning, and let the government in power organize an orderly withdrawal? So I think Labour is now paying the price for its policies on the referendum and the European Union, which is very sad, because the real issues are the issues that Corbyn, MacDonald, and others in the shadow cabinet raised throughout this campaign. I think there's no doubt that there will be a great deal of demoralization amongst the Labour Party and Corbyn supporters and the left in general, not just here, but in Europe, in South America, and the United States. It will affect Bernie Sanders as well, I'm afraid to say. It's a sad, tragic result.
Now, Tariq, what about all of the Labour's radical policies? Why didn't they catch on?
I think because the Conservatives were successful. They effectively fought the election on one slogan: we will get Brexit done. And that slogan appealed to large number of Labour voters, working class Labour voters, elderly voters in the north of England and in the Midlands, where, according to the exit polls, Labour has lost up to 70 seats. If this is the case, then I have to say that the entire strategy of the leadership in terms of how to deal with the referendum has now imploded. And the people who will suffer are many of the people who voted Conservative today. Let there be no doubt about that. If they think that getting Brexit done means that austerity will be over, that there's going to be a lot more money for public services, etc., they will get a rude shock. And I would also like to say that it's not impossible that if nothing really different happens over the next year and a half, you will see anger on the streets, as we are watching in Chile, as we are watching in France at this very moment. People will get angry because the electorate is volatile.
Now, Tariq, the exit polls suggest a very good result for the Scottish Nationalist Party, with 55 seats predicted, almost a clean sweep in Scotland. How do you read that?
Well, before this election campaign started, there was a very interesting survey of Conservative Party members. And the Conservative Party members were asked, would you rather push through Brexit, even if it meant a split in the Conservative Party, Scotland going independent, and a united Ireland? And a large majority said yes. Well, we've seen a split in the Conservative Party. It's now solidly a right-wing party. All the centre Tories have been expelled. It's going to be a very right-wing government. We've seen Scotland voting in overwhelming numbers for the SNP, and the SNP is now going to push and push and push for another referendum in Scotland. And thirdly, once all the untruths come out in relation to what is happening in Ireland, whether there's going to be a new border, etc., there will be growing pressure over the next few years for a unified Ireland. So ironically, this victory for the right-wing Conservatives under Boris Johnson might result in ending the British Union, the United Kingdom as we know it.
Tariq, we thank you so much for your time for teleSUR English. We have been speaking with Tariq Ali. He's a political analyst based in London. Coming up after the break, the Bolivian President Evo Morales arrives in Argentina, where he was granted asylum by President Alberto Fernandez. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Bolivian President Evo Morales has arrived in Argentina, where he has been granted asylum by the new government of President Alberto Fernandez. The deposed president arrived at Ezeiza Airport outside Buenos Aires from Cuba, where he had been for a medical check. After being forced to leave Bolivia last month by the coup, he had been in asylum in Mexico. He said he was now planning to stay in Argentina to restart the struggle for the poor and for the unity of Latin America. Mexico's foreign minister said that he had a conversation on Wednesday with Evo Morales, who informed him of his decision to move to Buenos Aires. He thanked Minister Marcelo Ebrard for the generosity of the people and government of Mexico. Argentina's new economy minister says that the country is holding talks with the IMF to renegotiate its loan inherited from Mauricio Macri. Minister Martín Guzmán gave a bleak diagnosis of the Argentine economy, saying the new administration faces a very deep economic and social crisis. Guzmán called the situation extremely fragile, forecasting a 55% inflation rate for the country this year, and says a comprehensive macroeconomic plan is in the works.
It is necessary to solve the debt problem. In order to be able to pay, you have to be able to pay. And in order to be able to pay, the economy has to recover. We have already had talks with the IMF, and there is recognition of the failure of the previous economic program. What falls now is to understand the need to move forward a different program, which is the one we are implementing.
Bolivia's de facto president has announced the extension of visa-free travel to U.S. and Israeli citizens. Under President Evo Morales, 12 years ago, Bolivia began requiring U.S. citizens to travel with a visa, and he created the same requirements for Israelis 5 years ago. Self-imposed President Janine Áñez is working to restore relations with the two countries, but faces criticism that her actions extend far beyond the responsibilities of an interim president.
Our government has taken the decision to eliminate entry visas for citizens from two important countries, USA and Israel, that have always contributed greatly to the development of tourism and investment in all regions of Bolivia. This decision will directly benefit areas such as Beni, that needs and gets so much from international tourism.
One of the leaders of the coup in Bolivia, Luis Fernando Camacho, has received an angry reception from demonstrators in Washington. The leader of the Santa Cruz Civic Committee, who now aims to stand for president in Bolivia, was at a meeting at the Inter-American Dialogue. Activists from Code Pink and Solidarity movements interrupted the session and accused him of being a fascist.
Do you have a response to the fact that you're protecting a fascist right now?
The authorities in Chile have confirmed that debris and human remains have been found from a military transport plane that went missing on its way to Antarctica. Search teams have been combing the waters off the southern tip of South America since the Chilean Air Force plane with 38 people on board went missing on Monday. Most were military personnel, but there were also civilian support workers heading for the Eduardo Frei Antarctic base.
Along with the parts of the plane that are still being found until now, human remains have been found that are most likely to be body parts of those who traveled on the correct C-130 plane.
A group of opposition congressmen in Colombia have called on the police authorities to explain the actions of the Mobile Anti-Riot Squad, or SMAT, following heavy repression of demonstrators during the national strike.
This is how an anti-riot squad in Colombia battles protesters. One of them is taken to a private vehicle with no official identification.
¿Estás bien? ¿Estás bien? Dale, dale, tranquila. Tranquila. Tranquila, tranquila, que yo voy detrás tuyo. Yo voy detrás tuyo, tranquila. Tranquila, yo voy detrás tuyo.
Citizens followed the car to protest against the action, and eventually the woman is released. This happened on the day that the world was commemorating International Human Rights Day. Hours before what many considered a kidnapping, the security forces dispersed a peaceful student protest, which was demanding changes in government economic policy.
Here in the country, there are areas totally abandoned by the state, like Chocó and La Guajira. We are here because of them. We are doing this for them. The state has abandoned the country, and all we have is businessmen filling their pockets.
For hours, they fired tear gas and used water cannons against young people. And although police authorities claim that their actions are legal, the lawmakers are demanding an explanation of the indiscriminate use of force and lack of control by the riot police.
It is a shame what's been happening. It seems like the worst times are coming back, times of disappearances. It reminds me of the worst dictatorships in the continent. I remember what happened in Chile with the students, what happened in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, in those terrible dictatorships. Could it be that Colombia is becoming a dictatorship? It is very regrettable.
Meanwhile, others, the conservative members of Congress, are making their own protest. Social movements say that they're trying to criminalize peaceful demonstrations.
More than $5 million were spent to buy armored anti-riot vehicles. With that money, they could have paid for the university education to 2,159 professionals.
The truth is that since the anti-riot squad was formed in 1999, they've been accused of several murders. One of the most recent victims has been a symbol. The young man, Dylan Cruz, who was peacefully protesting on November 21st and died after being attacked by a member of the riot police.
Coming up, torrential rains in South Africa caused heavy flooding, while many people have lost their homes. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Flooding has been reported across central and south Trinidad after torrential rains drenched the island over the past 2 days. At least 15 families have been evacuated after being marooned. The Meteorological Service has since issued a yellow alert for riverine flooding. Meanwhile, motorists are being advised to avoid driving in water where possible. The Defense Force, Fire Service, Disaster Management Unit, and the Ministry of Rural Development is coordinating relief efforts. Torrential rains in South Africa have caused flooding, resulting in many people losing their homes and all their belongings. Our correspondent Matuba Malachi spoke to those affected, trying to rebuild their lives.
Chaotic scenes came out of the country's capital, Pretoria, as people were trapped by flooding. The much-needed rains wreaked havoc, causing damage to property and roads. But those who bear the brunt during these times are people in slums who leave their rural homes to be closer to economic opportunities.
We are hoping government will take us to a land they promise us soon.
While others say they will look for other places to live, some have vowed to stay, saying all they want is safe land to build their homes closer to their places of work.
I'm not asking government to build me a house. All I want is safe land to build.
Many others were not able to save any of their belongings. The provincial government has since offered them a temporary shelter with the hope of getting them a permanent solution.
300 people affected. We've been providing them with food on a daily basis. Also, we provided them with blankets. They are currently staying on a temporary basis in these community facilities, but we want to work with them quickly to normalize so that they can't stay here for too long. These halls were not built as places of residence. There could otherwise be problems. We have children here, we have women, we have men. So we are working on this interim basis to house them here. But we're very happy that today the skies are clear, but we will continue to monitor the weather.
In every disaster, the usual casualties are the poor of the poorest. Here in Mamelodi Township, it's no different. As you can see behind me, that the people worst affected by the flash floods that we've seen for the past 7 days here in Mamelodi, Gauteng and the surrounding areas. Everywhere where there have been flash floods, the poor of the poorest have been the hardest hit by the natural disaster. I'm Matuba Mahlachi in Mamelodi Township, east of Pretoria, South Africa.
The South African Communist Party has closed its Special National Congress with a declaration. It was at the Congress that they evaluated the challenges experienced by the party and the South African people, particularly the working class and poor, and adopted resolutions to move on to a second radical phase and advance to socialism. The Congress noted that neoliberal economic policies have exacerbated the crisis of inequality, unemployment, and poverty. They strongly condemned the United States imperialist destabilization in parts of Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. Islamist fighters in Niger have killed 71 soldiers at a remote military camp in the deadliest raid against the country's army in recorded history. Niger's military spokesman said several hundred armed men attacked the base near the border with Mali. Organizations with links to the Islamic State group and Al-Qaeda have mounted increasingly lethal attacks across West Africa's Sahel region this year. Mali and Burkina Faso have been hardest hit. Algeria's polls opened on a Thursday morning despite a number of large protests against the election. 5 candidates are vying for the presidency, all of whom are dubbed children of the regime of ousted former President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Some demonstrators vowed to boycott the vote in which two former prime ministers and other former senior officials are contesting.
Algerians today are aware that they need a massive popular legitimacy. That's why we're noticing since this morning thousands of Algerians going to polling stations. And this is the real answer to those who were doubting that this day won't realize what people hope for.
And while many opted to exercise their franchise, thousands took part in huge boycott movements across the country. Despite police repression, demonstrators took to the streets with flags, placards, and posters as they called for new election candidates unaffiliated with the previous regime. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.